In a quiet Texas diner off an empty midnight highway, a nervous 19-year-old waiter was about to suffer the cruel amusement of outlaws. A routine shift turned deadly when the Devil's Hand biker gang stormed in, laughter as sharp as the knives they carried. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical late-night customer. For decades, he had been a martial arts champion, an action star, and before that, an elite Air Force veteran known worldwide for defeating opponents with unmatched precision. When the Devil's Hand poured beer and humiliation onto a trembling kid, they had no idea they were provoking a man who had dismantled stronger foes on bigger stages. Chuck rose from his booth with quiet resolve, delivering a strategic response that would shatter their dominance and trigger a reckoning none of them expected. What began as a rowdy gang tormenting a young waiter would become a battle that broke their power and restored hope. The lonely Texas highway and everyone who passed through Mel's roadside diner would never be the same after Chuck Norris poured pain on the Devil's Hand. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The neon sign of Mel's roadside diner flickered against the night sky, casting a pale blue glow across the empty highway. Just past midnight, the place stood like an island of light amid the darkness of rural Texas, where the road stretched endlessly in both directions. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of coffee and grilled onions. An old jukebox hummed in the corner, playing Johnny Cash at a volume just loud enough to fill the silences between sparse conversation. 5 booths lined the wall beneath windows that reflected the fluorescent ceiling lights. The counter stretched along the opposite side, its worn surface bearing decades of coffee rings and elbow marks. Behind that counter, Mel Harrison wiped his hands on a dish rag, his weathered face a map of 60-some years of hard work. He'd owned this place for 30 of them, seen all types come throat-ruckers, families, lovers running away, and occasionally, trouble. He could smell the latter from a mile away, and tonight, his nose was twitching. "More coffee, sir?" The voice belonged to Danny Whitaker, a lanky 19-year-old with kind eyes that hadn't yet learned to hide their nervousness. College textbooks peeked from his backpack behind the counter. Engineering, advanced calculus dreams bigger than this place. But for now, the night shift at Mel's helped keep his widowed mother's lights on and his sister in her special education classes. "Thank you," came the quiet reply from the corner booth. The man sitting there didn't look up as Danny refilled his cup. He didn't need to. Chuck Norris kept his attention on the modest plate of eggs and toast before him, seemingly focused on nothing but his meal. His presence was unassuming, just another traveler passing through, distinguished only by his calm stillness amid the gentle bustle of the diner. He wore a simple chambray shirt and jeans, no fancy watch or jewelry. His beard was neatly trimmed, his eyes clear and alert despite the late hour. Nothing about him announced his identity to the handful of patrons scattered throughout the dinner. A trucker nursing his 3rd cup of coffee, an elderly couple sharing a slice of pie, 2 local factory workers grabbing a meal after their late shift. Chuck's eyes, however, missed nothing. Not the nervous way Danny's hands trembled slightly as he poured, nor the protective glance Mel shot the boy's way, nor the distant rumble that had just become audible through the thin walls. Mel heard it too. His shoulders tensed as he looked up from the grill. "Danny," he called quietly. "Maybe clear those empty tables real quick." The rhythmic drumming grew louder, the unmistakable growl of multiple motorcycles approaching at speed. The elderly couple exchanged glances, the wife's hand reaching for her husband's across the table. The factory workers fell silent mid-conversation. Danny moved quickly, gathering plates from an empty booth, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. "Riders this late, Mr. Harrison?" Mel just nodded, his eyes flicking to the window as the first headlight swept across it. "Just be polite and quick with them. Probably just passing through." But his tone betrayed his doubt. Riders at this hour, coming in hot rather than just cruising by it, spelled trouble. Outside, engines roared before cutting abruptly. Shadows moved across the windows, 5, 6, then 8 figures. Laughter erupted, loud and deliberate. The kind meant to announce a presence rather than express joy. In his corner booth, Chuck took another bite of toast. His posture hadn't changed, but something shifted in his awareness, a predator's recognition of another predator entering its territory. He didn't look up when the door slammed open hard enough to rattle the blinds. He didn't need to. He already knew exactly what was coming. The first biker crashed through the door like he was breaking into a fortress rather than entering a business. Heavy-set and tall, with a wild beard and leather vest emblazoned with patches, he held the door open as 7 others strutted in behind him. They moved like they owned the place, boots stomping, voices loud, bodies taking up more space than necessary. Their leader came in last. Unlike the others, he moved with a controlled swagger. Leaner, younger, with sharp features and cold eyes. He wore his arrogance like a second skin. A jagged scar ran from his temple to his jaw, and the patches on his vest read, Devil's Hand MC, with Ripper beneath it. "Well, look at this cozy little shithole," Ripper announced, his voice cutting through Johnny Cash's gentle baritone. "Looks like we found ourselves a midnight snack, boys." The other bikers laughed on cue, spreading out through the diner. One shoved a chair with his boot. Another leaned too close to the elderly couple, eyeing the woman's pearl necklace with obvious interest. 2 more slid into a booth, kicking their feet up on the table. Mel straightened behind the counter, his face a careful mask. "Welcome to Mel's. What can I get for you gentlemen tonight?" Ripper smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Gentlemen, he calls us. You hear that, boys? We're gentlemen now." He sauntered toward the counter, leather creaking with each step. "I'll tell you what, Mel. You can start by turning that sad-ass music off and getting us some real drinks." Danny stood frozen by the service station, empty plates still in his hands, eyes wide. "We serve food and coffee here," Mel replied evenly. "No alcohol license. Got sodas, milkshakes, and the best pie in 3 counties. Ripper's smile tightened. "That right?" He turned, scanning the diner slowly until his gaze fell on Danny. "What do you think, kid? Nothing stronger hiding back there for special customers?" Danny's mouth opened, then closed. "Just what Mr. Harrison said, sir." "Sir?" Ripper echoed, looking back at his crew. "You boys hear how polite everyone is in here? Sir this, gentlemen that." He stepped closer to Danny. "You look nervous, kid. We making you nervous?" In the corner booth, Chuck set down his fork with careful precision. His movements were unhurried as he reached for his napkin, wiping his mouth before taking another sip of coffee. His eyes never lifted, but his awareness expanded, cataloging positions, distances, angles. The elderly man slid cash beneath his plate and helped his wife to her feet. They moved cautiously toward the door, trying to be invisible. One of the bikers stepped deliberately into their path. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, looming over them. "Night's just getting started." "Please," the woman whispered, clutching her husband's arm. "We're just trying to get home." The biker grinned, revealing a gold tooth. "Maybe pay the exit tax first, Grandma." "That's a pretty necklace. Let them pass." Mel's voice carried from behind the counter, firmer now. Ripper raised an eyebrow. "Oh? You making the rules here, old man? In my diner?" "Yes." Mel's hands were flat on the counter, steadying himself. "They're regular customers. Good people." For a moment, tension crackled in the air. Then Ripper laughed and waved a dismissive hand. "Let the fossils go, Shark. We got better entertainment." The biker stepped aside reluctantly. The elderly couple hurried out, the bell above the door tinkling in their wake. Danny still hadn't moved, plates clutched to his chest like a shield. "Hey, you!" Ripper called to him. "Twitchy! We're hungry! What's good here?" Before Danny could answer, the heavy-set biker who'd entered first slammed his fist on a table. "I want some fucking service here. Burgers all around, and coffee. Black." Danny nodded quickly and retreated behind the counter, stacking dishes with trembling hands. Mel moved to the grill, his eyes never leaving the bikers as he laid out patties. The truckers had slipped out during the commotion. The factory workers huddled in their booth, heads down, clearly hoping to finish their meals unnoticed. Only Chuck remained apart, still focused on his own simple meal, as if the chaos unfolding around him existed in another dimension. One of the bikers noticed him then, the lone figure seemingly oblivious to their entrance. "Hey, what about this one?" he called to Ripper. "Old guy doesn't seem impressed with us." Ripper glanced over, eyes narrowing slightly as he took in Chuck's calm demeanor. For a heartbeat, something like uncertainty flickered across his face, an animal's instinctive recognition of a more dangerous predator. But it vanished quickly beneath practiced bravado. "Probably deaf," Ripper dismissed, "or too stupid to know when to be scared." He turned his attention back to Danny, who was hurriedly pouring coffee into mugs. "Careful there, shaky hands. Wouldn't want you to burn yourself." Danny nodded without looking up, his focus entirely on not spilling. He managed to fill 8 mugs and place them on a tray. The night was still young. The storm had only just begun to gather. And in his corner booth, Chuck Norris continued to eat his simple meal, patient as the coming dawn. The aroma of grilling meat filled the diner, momentarily overpowering the scent of leather and unwashed denim that had swept in with the bikers. Mel worked the grill with grim efficiency, his weathered hands flipping burgers, while his eyes never stopped tracking the men who'd invaded his establishment. Danny moved between the counter and the bikers' tables, delivering coffee with the careful precision of someone disarming a bomb. His shoulders hunched forward as if trying to make himself smaller, less noticeable prey animal's instinct in the presence of predators. "Careful, Twitchy," said a biker with a shaved head and arms fully sleeved in tattoos. He stuck his boot out as Danny passed, nearly tripping him. "Wouldn't want to make a mess." The others laughed, the sound harsh against the diner's usual quiet atmosphere. One reached out and plucked the pencil from behind Danny's ear. "Taking our order or writing love notes?" He snapped the pencil in half and dropped the pieces on the floor. "Get me some fries with that burger." Danny nodded, bending to retrieve the broken pencil before hurrying back to the counter. The factory workers had paid quickly and slipped out during the commotion, leaving only Chuck Norris and the bikers in the diner. Ripper sprawled in a booth near the center, surveying his makeshift kingdom. He drummed his fingers on the table, a restless energy radiating from him. The initial rush of intimidation was already wearing off, and Danny could sense the dangerous boredom setting in. "Hey, Mel," Ripper called out. "This place always this dead? Or did we scare off all your customers?" Mel didn't look up from the grill. "Midnight on a Tuesday. It's about normal." "Normal," Ripper repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. "You hear that, boys? We've landed in normal USA." He laughed, and the others joined in dutifully. "I hate normal." One of the bikers, a wiry man with a patchy beard, slid into the booth across from Ripper. "We could liven things up." His eyes flicked toward Danny. "Kid looks like he could use some excitement in his life." Something cold slithered down Danny's spine as he felt their attention focus on him more intently. He busied himself arranging condiments on a tray, trying to become invisible through sheer concentration. Mel placed the first batch of burgers on plates. "Danny, orders up." Danny moved to retrieve them, grateful for the distraction. But as he reached for the plates, Ripper's voice cut through the air again. "So what's your story, Twitchy? You look like you should be hitting books, not slinging hash at midnight." Danny froze, trapped between the counter and the biker's attention. Just working my way through college, sir. College boy, Ripper said, exchanging glances with his companions. Hear that? We got ourselves a future doctor or lawyer serving us. What are you studying, kid? Engineering? Danny replied quietly, loading burgers onto his tray. Engineering, Ripper mimicked, his voice high and nasal. Gonna build bridges? Design fancy buildings while guys like us do the real work putting them up? Danny said nothing, focusing on balancing the tray as he lifted it. In his corner booth, Chuck set his empty coffee cup down with quiet precision. His meal was finished, the plate pushed slightly away. Still, he made no move to leave. His stillness was not the forced rigidity of fear, like the factory workers who had fled, but the patient observation of someone reading a situation with expert eyes. Ripper's attention shifted suddenly to Chuck. What about you, old-timer? You got something to say? Chuck finally looked up, his gaze direct but revealing nothing. He offered a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, and returned his attention to the last piece of toast on his plate. The dismissal, so subtle yet so complete, sent a flush of anger across Ripper's face. Not even gonna answer me? Who do you think you are? The heavy-set biker leaned over and muttered something in Ripper's ear. Ripper's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed again as he studied Chuck more carefully. No way, he said, but doubt had crept into his voice. Danny approached with the tray of burgers, moving cautiously between tables to reach the bikers. As he began distributing plates, the patchy-bearded biker deliberately bumped his elbow, sending a burger sliding off its plate onto the floor. Oops, the biker said with mock concern. Butterfingers. Danny swallowed hard. I'll get you another one. Damn right you will, the biker replied. And make it snappy. I'm starving. As Danny turned to head back to the counter, another biker stuck out his boot. This time, Danny couldn't avoid it. He stumbled, the heavy tray tipping. Coffee mugs crashed to the floor, shattering on impact. Hot coffee splashed across Danny's legs and pooled on the linoleum. The bikers erupted in laughter. Jesus Christ, kid, Ripper said between chuckles. You really are pathetic. Danny stood amid the wreckage, coffee soaking his pant legs, shards of ceramic scattered around his feet. His face burned with humiliation. Mel stepped out from behind the counter, dish towel in hand. That's enough. You've had your fun. The laughter died down, replaced by a dangerous silence. Excuse me? Ripper's voice was soft, which somehow made it more threatening. I said that's enough, Mel repeated. His voice steady despite the fear evident in his eyes. You want to eat, fine. You want to be loud, I can live with that. But you don't mess with my staff. Ripper slid out of the booth and rose to his full height, a head taller than Mel. Is that right? And who's going to stop us? You, old man? The other bikers stood too, forming a loose circle around Mel and Danny. The atmosphere in the diner had shifted from uncomfortable to dangerous. Maybe we're not making ourselves clear, Ripper continued, stepping closer to Mel. We go where we want. We do what we want. And right now, we want some entertainment. The heavyset biker grabbed a pitcher of water from a nearby table. With deliberate slowness, he moved toward Danny, who stood frozen in place. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. No, Mel said, stepping between them. You do that, and I'm calling the sheriff. Ripper laughed. Sheriff's station is 20 miles from here. By the time he arrives, we'll be long gone. His hand shot out, grabbing Mel by the front of his apron. And your little diner might not be in such good shape. Chuck set down his napkin and placed both hands flat on the table. The movement was unhurried but somehow drew every eye in the place. He didn't stand, didn't speak, just looked directly at Ripper with calm, unwavering eyes. Ripper faltered momentarily under that gaze, then recovered his bravado. "You got something to say, old man, say it." Chuck remained silent, but something in his steady gaze made Ripper release Mel's apron and take a half step back. "Skull," Ripper said to the heavyset biker. "Give our college boy a shower. Looks like he spilled on himself." Before Mel could intervene again, Skull upended the water pitcher over Danny's head. Water cascaded down the young man's face and shirt, dripping onto the already wet floor. Danny gasped, blinking rapidly, his body rigid with shock and humiliation. The bikers roared with laughter. One slapped his knee, another pounded the table. "That's better," Ripper said, grinning. "But I think he's still too dry." He reached for a bottle of ketchup from the table, uncapped it, and held it up. "What do you think, boys? Red's his color?" The patchy-bearded biker had moved behind Danny now, gripping his shoulders to hold him in place. "Do it, Rip. Kid needs some color in his life." Danny's eyes were wide with terror and shame. A tremor ran through his body as he struggled not to cry. Mel lunged forward. "That's enough." Two bikers caught him, restraining him easily. Mel struggled against their grip, his face reddening with effort and anger. "Let him go," he demanded. "This is my place." "Not tonight it ain't," Ripper replied. He turned the ketchup bottle upside down, holding it over Danny's head. "Tonight it's ours." A single tear escaped Danny's eye, trailing down his wet cheek. He stared at the floor, shoulders slumped in defeat. At the corner table, Chuck Norris finally moved. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. He didn't leap to his feet or shout a challenge. He simply stood, pushing his chair back with a soft scrape against the linoleum floor. The sound shouldn't have carried over the bikers' laughter, but somehow it did. The diner fell silent as every head turned toward the corner booth. Chuck stood straight, his posture relaxed, yet commanding. His face remained impassive, but his eyes had changed. There was an intensity there now, a focused resolve that hadn't been visible before. Ripper lowered the ketchup bottle slightly. "Well, well, Grandpa's joining the party." Chuck took one step forward, then another. He moved unhurriedly toward the group, his gait steady and controlled. "You got something to say?" Ripper challenged, his voice carrying a slight edge of uncertainty now. Chuck stopped a few feet away. He looked at Danny, then at Mel, then finally at Ripper. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried throughout the diner. "Let the boy go." The words hung in the air, simple yet weighted with authority. It wasn't a request or even a demand, it was a statement of what was about to happen. Ripper blinked, then forced a laugh. "Or what, old-timer? You gonna make us?" Chuck didn't answer. He didn't need to. The calm certainty in his eyes said everything necessary. For a moment, the diner balanced on a knife's edge of tension. Then Ripper grinned. All teeth, and no humor. "Boys," he said. "Looks like we got a hero." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the scene frozen in the center of Mel's diner. Ketchup dripped slowly from the bottle in Ripper's hand. Danny stood rigid, water still trickling from his soaked hair down the back of his neck. Behind the counter, the neglected burgers began to smoke slightly on the grill. Ripper's grin widened as he looked. "Chuck." Up and down. "I was getting bored anyway," he said, handing the ketchup bottle to a nearby biker. "This might actually be fun." Chuck hadn't moved, his stance casual yet balanced, hands loose at his sides. His eyes clear, focused, unblinking, remained fixed on Ripper. "Let them go," Chuck repeated, his voice carrying the same quiet authority. The patchy-bearded biker snorted. "You hear this guy? Who the hell does he think he is?" Skull, the heavyset biker, narrowed his eyes as he studied Chuck more carefully. "Hang on. I think I know this dude." He tilted his head, frowning. He looks like that guy from the movies. A ripple of recognition moved through the group. The biker holding Danny loosened his grip slightly, distracted by this new development. Chuck? Norris? One of them said, sounding uncertain. No way. Ripper's expression flickered between doubt and disdain. Don't be stupid. What would Chuck Norris be doing in this dump? Chuck didn't confirm or deny his identity. It didn't matter. Names were irrelevant to what was about to happen. Danny took advantage of the distraction to pull free, stumbling away from his captor and retreating behind the counter where Mel stood. The older man put a protective arm around the boy's shoulders, his eyes never leaving the confrontation unfolding in his diner. Ripper took a step toward Chuck, closing the distance between them. He stood several inches taller, his leather vest creaking as he squared his shoulders. I don't care if you're Chuck Norris or Jesus Christ himself, he said, voice low and menacing. This is our place now, and we're not done having fun. Behind him, the other bikers spread out in a loose semicircle, hands flexing, bodies tensing for action. The atmosphere in the diner crackled with violent potential. Chuck's expression remained unchanged. There are two ways this can go, he said calmly. You leave now, no one gets hurt. Or you leave later. Your choice. Ripper's face darkened. How about a third option? You mind your own business, old man. Or you won't be leaving at all. He reached into his vest and withdrew a switchblade, the steel catching the fluorescent light as the blade snapped open. Last chance, Ripper said, his voice dropping to a growl. Sit down and shut up. Chuck's gaze shifted briefly to the knife, then back to Ripper's eyes. Something changed in Chuck's stancia. Subtle shift of weight, an almost imperceptible squaring of his shoulders. It wasn't much, but it transformed him. The quiet diner patron was gone, replaced by something else, entirely a predator who had decided to stop observing and start acting. I was hoping you'd be smarter, Chuck said, genuine regret in his voice. Ripper lunged forward, knife slashing in a vicious arc toward Chuck's midsection. What happened next occurred so quickly that Danny, watching wide-eyed from behind the counter, would later struggle to describe it. One moment Ripper was attacking, confidence written across his face. The next, he was on one knee, his empty hand twisted at an unnatural angle, the knife clattering across the floor where Chuck had sent it with a flick of his wrist. Ripper's face registered shock before contorting with rage and pain. Get him, he snarled. The bikers surged forward as one. Skull swung a massive fist at Chuck's head. The patchy-bearded biker grabbed a chair, hoisting it as a makeshift weapon. Two others converged from the sides, looking to overwhelm Chuck with numbers. Chuck moved like water fluid. Efficient. Unstoppable. He sidestepped Skull's punch with such precise timing that the big man's momentum carried him forward into one of his companions, sending both crashing into a table. The chair swung at his head, met only air as Chuck ducked beneath it, then rose to deliver two lightning-fast strikes to the wielder's solar plexus. The biker dropped the chair and folded over, gasping for breath that wouldn't come. One of the flanking bikers grabbed Chuck's shirt from behind. Without looking back, Chuck caught the man's wrist, twisted, and used the biker's own momentum to flip him over his shoulder. The man crashed onto a table, which collapsed beneath his weight, sending plates and condiments scattering across the floor. Through it all, Chuck's expression remained unchanged, focused but calm, as if he were performing a familiar task that required concentration but not concern. Danny watched in stunned disbelief. Despite the violence erupting before him, he felt an odd sense of relief washing over him. The humiliation and fear that had paralyzed him moments ago were receding, replaced by a sense of awe. Mel gripped the counter with white knuckles. Jesus, he whispered. It really is him. Ripper had regained his feet, cradling his injured wrist. His face was a mask of fury as he snatched a bottle from a nearby table and smashed it against the edge, creating a jagged weapon. "You're dead!" he spat, circling Chuck warily. 3 more bikers joined him, forming a tighter ring around Chuck. They moved more cautiously now, their initial confidence shaken by how easily their first assault had been repelled. Chuck turned slowly, keeping them all in view. His breathing remained steady, his movements economical. When he spoke, his voice was as calm as if he were discussing the weather. "It doesn't have to go this way," he said. "Walk out now. No one has to get seriously hurt." Ripper's response was a savage lunge with the broken bottle. Chuck deflected his arm with a forearm block, then delivered a precise strike to Ripper's elbow that made the joint buckle. The bottle dropped from suddenly nerveless fingers as Ripper howled in pain. 2 bikers attacked simultaneously from opposite sides. Chuck dropped to one knee, letting a wild haymaker pass over his head, then rose with palm strike that lifted one attacker off his feet. As the man fell backward, Chuck pivoted smoothly to block a kick from the second attacker, caught the extended leg, and swept the biker's supporting foot from under him. The man crashed to the floor with bone-jarring force. Skull charged like a bull, head down, massive arms outstretched to grapple. Chuck waited until the last possible moment, then stepped aside while extending his foot. The simple trip, combined with Skull's momentum, sent the big man careening into the counter. He hit it with enough force to crack the laminate surface before sliding to the floor in a dazed heap. The remaining bikers hesitated, looking at each other uncertainly. What had begun as easy entertainment had transformed into something else. Entirely a systematic dismantling of their supposed strength by a man who hadn't even raised his voice. Ripper, clutching his injured arm, backed toward the door. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Not by a long shot." Chuck met his gaze steadily. "It can be. Right here. Right now. Your choice." Something in Chuck's calm certainty seemed to further enrage Ripper. He looked around wildly, then spotted Danny watching from behind the counter. A cruel smile twisted his features. "The kid," he said, jerking his chin toward Danny. "Grab him." 2 bikers moved toward the counter. Mel stepped in front of Danny, grabbing a spatula from the gorilla pathetic weapon, but all he had. "Stay back," he warned, his voice thin with fear but determined. Chuck moved so quickly he seemed to blur. One moment he was facing Ripper. The next he stood between the approaching bikers and the counter. His hands had finally closed into fists. "No," Chuck said, and that single word carried such weight that the bikers stopped in their tracks. Ripper's face contorted with rage and frustration. The control he'd established through intimidation was slipping away with each passing second. In desperation, he reached behind his back and pulled out a snub-nosed revolver. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "Nobody moves." The atmosphere in the diner shifted instantly. The chaotic brawl froze as the bikers backed away from the gun, leaving Chuck standing alone in the center of the room. Ripper pointed the revolver at Chuck's chest, his hand trembling slightly. "Not so tough now, are you? All your fancy moves don't mean shit against this." Chuck's expression remained unchanged. If anything, a hint of sadness crossed his features. "Put it away," he said quietly. "You use that. There's no going back." Ripper laughed. A high, strained sound. "Going back? There's no going back anyway. You've seen to that." He waved the gun, gesturing at his injured companions. "You think we just walk away from this?" "Yes," Chuck said simply. "That's exactly what you do. You walk away. You leave these people alone. And you never come back." Ripper's finger tightened on the trigger. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't put a hole in you right now." Chuck didn't flinch. Didn't tense. Didn't take his eyes off Ripper's. "Because you're better than this." The words, so unexpected, seemed to catch Ripper off guard. His brow furrowed in confusion. "What?" "Deep down," Chuck continued, his voice level and certain, "you know this isn't who you want to be. Terrorizing people weaker than you. Threatening a kid just trying to earn a living. Pulling a gun when you start losing a fight." He shook his head slightly. "That's not strength. That's fear wearing a mask." Ripper's hand wavered, the gun barrel dipping slightly before he steadied it. "Shut up. You don't know me." "I know enough," Chuck replied. "I know you've got a choice right now. We all do. Always." A heavy silence filled the diner. The only sounds were the soft groans of injured bikers and the distant hum of the neon sign outside. For a moment, everything balanced on the edge of a knife, life and death, choice and consequence, hanging on the trigger pressure of one man's finger. Then, from outside, came the wail of a distant siren. Ripper's head snapped toward the sound, his eyes widening. "Cops?" He glared at Mel. "You called them?" Mel shook his head, looking as surprised as everyone else. The patchy-bearded biker, now leaning against a table and holding his ribs, spoke up. "Highway patrol makes rounds on this stretch Tuesday nights, regular as clockwork." Ripper's face showed naked calculation as he weighed his options. The gun remained pointed at Chuck, but his resolve was clearly wavering. "This isn't over," he said finally, backing toward the door. "You hear me? This is not over." Chuck stood motionless, watching him retreat. "It can be," he said again. "Your choice." The remaining bikers helped their injured companions to their feet, casting wary glances at Chuck as they backed toward the exit. Ripper was the last to leave, the gun still extended before him until he reached the door. There, he paused for one final threat. "I'll remember your face, old man. And I'll find you." Chuck's response was quiet, but carried clearly across the wreckage of the diner. "No, you won't." The certainty in those 3 words seemed to unnerve Ripper more than any threat could have. He backed through the door, letting it swing shut behind him. Moments later came the roar of motorcycles starting up, then fading as the gang sped away into the night. In the sudden quiet of the diner, Danny let out a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Mel slumped against the counter, the adrenaline that had kept him upright now draining away. Chuck surveyed the damaged, dispassionately overturned tables, broken dishes, spilled food. His gaze came to rest on Danny, still dripping from the water that had been poured over him. "You all right, son?" Chuck asked. Danny nodded, unable to find his voice. The wail of the siren grew louder, then cut off abruptly as a patrol car pulled into the parking lot, its lights washing the diner in alternating red and blue. Chuck turned to Mel. "You might want to put some coffee on for the officer," he said. "Sounds like it's going to be a long night." The highway patrolman, Officer Davis, according to his nameplate, served the devastation of Mel's diner with a low whistle. Overturned chairs lay scattered across the linoleum floor. Broken dishes and food created an abstract painting of chaos. The corner of the counter was cracked where Skull had crashed into it. The air still hung heavy with tension, as if the violence that had erupted minutes ago had left an invisible residue. "And you say it was 8 of them?" Davis asked, flipping open his notepad. He was young, maybe 30, with the wary eyes of someone who'd seen enough to know how quickly situations could turn bad. Mel nodded, handing the officer a mug of fresh coffee. "Devil's Hand, MC, according to their patches." Leader called himself Ripper. "Had a scar here." He traced a line from his temple to his jaw. Davis's expression darkened. "I know them. They've been causing trouble up and down the interstate for months. Based out of Riders Creek, about 40 miles east." He took a sip of coffee and glanced at Danny, who sat wrapped in a tablecloth Mel had found to replace his soaked shirt. "You okay, son?" Danny nodded, though his hands still trembled slightly. "Yes, sir." "And you're saying one man took on all 8 of them?" Davis looked skeptical as he turned toward Chuck, who stood quietly by the window, gazing out at the empty highway. "That right, sir?" Chuck turned, his face impassive. "They didn't leave me much choice." Davis studied him for a long moment, recognition slowly dawning in his eyes. "Hold on. Aren't you just passing through?" Chuck interrupted gently. "Stopped for a late dinner." The officer opened his mouth as if to pursue the question, then seemed to think better of it. He returned his attention to his notepad. "And one of them pulled a gun?" Mel nodded grimly. "Would have used it too, if not for," he gestured toward Chuck. "For the sirens," Chuck corrected smoothly. "Good timing on your part, officer." Davis looked between them, clearly sensing there was more to the story. "Uh-huh." He made another note, then snapped his notebook closed. "Well, I'll put out an APB on the gang. With any luck, we'll pick them up before they cause more trouble." He hesitated, then added, "But I wouldn't count on it. These guys are slippery, and they've got friends in Riders Creek." The bell above the door jingled as it swung open. Everyone tensed, but it was only the elderly couple who had fled earlier. The old man held the door for his wife, both peering cautiously inside. "Is it safe to come back?" the woman asked. "We left our car. Thought we'd wait down at the gas station until—" Her voice trailed off as she took in the destruction. "They're gone, Martha," Mel assured her. "You can get your car." The old man stepped forward, his weathered face creased with concern. "We called the sheriff from the gas station. He should be here soon." His eyes found Chuck, and a glimmer of recognition crossed his features. "Say, aren't you just helping clean up?" Chuck said, already bending to right an overturned chair. Officer Davis finished his coffee and set the mug on the counter. "I'll file my report and keep an eye out for the gang. You folks might want to close up early tonight." He glanced at Chuck again, curiosity evident in his expression, but he simply nodded and headed for the door. "Call the station if they come back. Don't try to handle it yourselves." As the door swung shut behind him, silence settled over the diner. The elderly couple retreated to their car after a few more concerned inquiries. Danny began sweeping up broken glass, his movements mechanical, as if working on autopilot. Mel surveyed his damaged diner with a weary sigh. "Insurance will cover most of it," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "Been meaning to replace that counter anyway." Chuck continued righting chairs and tables, working methodically through the debris. His movements were precise and economical, wasting no energy. "You don't have to do that," Mel told him. Chuck glanced up. "I don't mind." Danny paused his sweeping, leaning on the broom handle. "Why did you help us?" he asked suddenly. "You could have just left when they first came in." Chuck straightened, considering the question. "Some things you can't walk away from," he said finally. "Not if you want to live with yourself after." "Well, I'm glad you didn't walk away," Mel said. He extended his hand. "Thank you." Chuck shook it briefly, then resumed his work. The three men continued cleaning in companionable silence, bringing order back to the chaos. The diner slowly began to resemble itself again, wounded but recognizable. The distant rumble of motorcycles shattered their quiet industry. Danny froze, his face draining of color. Mel's hand moved instinctively toward the phone on the wall. "Might not be them," Chuck said. But his body had already shifted into a state of heightened awareness, his movements becoming more fluid, more centered. The rumble grew louder, then slowed as it approached the diner. Headlights swept across the windows, illuminating the interior in harsh white light before going dark. Mel moved to stand beside Danny, one hand on the young man's shoulder. "Get in the back," he said quietly. Danny shook his head. "I'm staying." The sound of multiple boots on gravel carried clearly through the thin walls. The door handle rattled, then the bell jingled as the door swung open. Ripper stepped in first, his face a mask of barely contained rage. Behind him came the other biker Saul, 8 of them, including those who had been injured in the earlier confrontation. They had regrouped and returned, and now they filled the doorway like a dark tide. "Told you this wasn't over," Ripper said, his cold eyes fixed on Chuck. Chuck set down the chair he had been positioning and turned to face them fully. His stance was relaxed but balanced, ready for whatever might come. "Bad decision," he said simply. Ripper's laugh held no humor. "You think so? See, I've been thinking about our little encounter. Figured out my mistake." He stepped forward, letting the others file in behind him. "I underestimated you. Won't happen again." The bikers spread out, forming a loose semicircle. Mel and Danny backed toward the counter, trapped between the gang and the wall. "Officer Davis just left," Mel said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Sheriff's on his way too." "Good for them," Ripper replied without taking his eyes off Chuck. "They can clean up what's left when we're done." Chuck remained still, his expression unchanged. "Last chance," he said quietly. "Walk away." Something shifted in Ripper's face, a flicker of uncertainty quickly masked by bravado. 8 against 1, old man. You do the math." "I have," Chuck replied. "The numbers don't favor you." A ripple of unease passed through the bikers. Despite their superior numbers, the memory of how easily Chuck had dispatched them earlier was clearly still fresh. Ripper sensed their hesitation and snarled. "He got lucky before. This time we're ready for his tricks." He reached into his vest, and for a heart-stopping moment, Mel thought he was going for the gun again. Instead, Ripper withdrew a set of brass knuckles, slipping them over his fingers with practiced ease. "No more playing nice," he said, flexing his hand. The others produced weapons of their own, a chain, a blackjack, a knife. The stakes had risen dramatically since their first encounter. Chuck took in the arsenal arrayed against him with a calm assessment. His eyes moved from one biker to the next, noting positions, weapons, stances. When he spoke, his voice was almost gentle. "This isn't a path you want to continue down." Ripper's face contorted with rage. "Enough talk." He lunged forward, brass knuckles gleaming under the fluorescent lights. What happened next would be permanently etched into Danny's memoria ballet of violence, so precise, so controlled, that it seemed choreographed rather than spontaneous. Chuck sidestepped Ripper's charge with such perfect timing that the biker's momentum carried him past his target. As Ripper stumbled to regain his balance, Chuck delivered a precise strike to the back of his knee that sent him crashing to the floor. The other bikers surged forward as one, weapons raised. Chuck moved to meet them, his body flowing like water between their attacks. A chain whistled through the air where his head had been a moment before. A knife thrust met empty space as he pivoted away. A wild swing with the blackjack found only air. Chuck's counterstrikes were devastatingly effective. Each movement connected with surgical precision, a palm heel to a solar plexus that left one biker gasping for breath, an elbow strike that numbed another's arm, causing the knife to clatter to the floor, a sweep that took the legs out from under a third. He never seemed to hurry, yet he was always exactly where he needed to be, a half-second ahead of each attack. There was an economy to his movements that made the biker's wild swings look wasteful and amateurish by comparison. From behind the counter, Danny watched in awe as Chuck systematically dismantled the gang that had terrorized them. It wasn't just the physical skill that impressed him, though that was remarkable enough, but the absolute control Chuck maintained throughout. There was no rage in his actions, no unnecessary force, no desire to humiliate. He simply did what needed to be done, with the minimum effort required. Ripper had regained his feet and circled around, trying to catch Chuck from behind while he dealt with the others. His brass-knuckled fist arced toward Chuck's head in what should have been a devastating blow. Without seeming to look, Chuck ducked at precisely the right moment. Ripper's swing carried him forward, off balance. Chuck caught his extended arm, twisted, and used Ripper's own momentum to flip him over his shoulder. Ripper crashed onto a table with enough force to collapse it, sending silverware and condiments scattering across the floor. 3 bikers were down now, the others hesitating as they reassessed their strategy. Skull, the heavyset one, decided to rush Chuck head-on, while 2 others moved to flank him. Chuck stepped into Skull's charge, rather than away from an unexpected move that threw off the big man's timing. As they collided, Chuck redirected Skull's momentum upward, lifting him off his feet with a perfectly executed hip throw. Skull sailed through the air and crashed into the 2 flanking bikers, sending all 3 tumbling to the ground in a tangle of limbs and curses. The remaining bikers backed away, their earlier confidence shattered. One turned and bolted for the door without a backward glance. Ripper struggled to his feet, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. His face was a mask of fury and disbelief. "What are you?" he demanded. Chuck regarded him steadily. "Just a man who's trying to have a quiet dinner." Something in Chuck's calm demeanor seemed to enrage Ripper further. With a roar of frustration, he charged again, swinging wildly with the brass knuckles. Chuck caught his wrist in mid-swing, applied pressure to a specific point, and the brass knuckles fell from suddenly nerveless fingers. A quick twist turned Ripper around, his arm locked behind his back in a hold that had him rising to his tiptoes to avoid having his shoulder dislocated. "It's over," Chuck said quietly, close to Ripper's ear. "Accept it." For a moment, Ripper continued to struggle, his face contorted with rage and pain. Then, gradually, the fight seemed to drain out of him. His shoulders slumped, his resistance faded. Chuck released him with a small push that sent him stumbling forward. Ripper caught himself against the counter, breathing heavily, his back to Chuck. The remaining bikers watched warily, waiting to see what their leader would do. The atmosphere in the diner crackled with tension and uncertainty. Slowly, Ripper turned. His face had undergone a transformation, the arrogance stripped away, replaced by something darker, more desperate. His hand moved to the small of his back, and when it reappeared, it held the snub-nosed revolver. "Enough," he said, his voice tight with fury. "Enough of this." The gun wavered between Chuck and the counter, where Mel and Danny stood frozen. Ripper's eyes darted back and forth, calculating, desperate. "Put it down," Chuck said, his voice calm but firm. "You don't want to add murder to your problems." Ripper's laugh was harsh and brittle. "My problems? You've got no idea, old man." The gun steadied, pointing directly at Chuck's chest. "On your knees. Now." Chuck remained standing, his gaze fixed on Ripper's. "No." The simple refusal seemed to catch Ripper off guard. He blinked, momentarily uncertain. Then his face hardened again. "I'll shoot you where you stand." "You'll try," Chuck acknowledged. "But ask yourself what happens after. Even if you succeed, which isn't as certain as you think, what then? Police are already on their way. Witnesses have seen your faces, your bikes, your colors. This doesn't end well for you." Doubt flickered across Ripper's features. The gun dipped slightly, then steadied again. "Shut up. Just shut up, and get on your knees." Chuck took a single step forward. "No." Ripper's finger tightened on the trigger. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His breathing came in short, sharp bursts. "Last chance," he warned, voice cracking. Chuck took another step. "For you, yes," he agreed. "It is." Time seemed to stretch, each second expanding to contain a lifetime of choice and consequence. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Someone's ragged breathing. It might have been Danny's, or Mel's, or one of the downed bikers provided a counterpoint to the tense silence. Ripper's eyes darted to his fallen companions, then to the door, measuring distances, calculating odds. The gun trembled almost imperceptibly in his grip. Chuck took a third step. close enough now that the gun barrel nearly touched his chest. "Make the right choice," he said quietly. For once. Something broke in Ripper's expression. Not surrender exactly, but a recognition of inevitability. The gun lowered slowly to his side. "This isn't over," he said. But the words lacked conviction. "Yes," Chuck replied, with quiet certainty. "It is." The wail of sirens in the distance punctuated his words like an exclamation point. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows as multiple vehicles pulled into the parking lot. Ripper looked around at his fallen gang, at the destruction they had caused, at the man who had so thoroughly defeated them. For the first time, uncertainty replaced arrogance in his eyes. Chuck stepped back, giving him space. "Your choice," he said one final time. "Right here. Right now." Ripper stared at him for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately, placed the gun on the counter. Without a word, he turned and walked toward the door, shoulders slumped in defeat. The remaining bikers followed, helping their injured companions to their feet. They filed out silently, all bravado gone, leaving only the wreckage of their failed intimidation behind. As the door swung shut behind them, Danny let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Mel slumped against the counter, relief washing over his weathered features. Outside, voices shouted commands. Car doors slammed. The bikers were being detained by the arriving officers. Inside the diner, Chuck calmly picked up the revolver from the counter, removed the bullets, and set both safely aside for the police. Then he returned to righting an overturned chair, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. "You knew he wouldn't shoot," Mel said, half statement, half question. Chuck considered this as he straightened a table. "I knew he had a choice," he corrected gently. "We all do. Always." Danny stared at him, eyes wide with admiration and something like wonder. How did you know what to do? With all of them coming at you at once?" Chuck's expression softened slightly. "Practice," he said simply. "And perspective." Before Danny could ask what he meant, the door burst open again. Sheriff Wilson strode in, hand on his holstered weapon, taking in the scene with practiced eyes. 2 deputies followed, alert and wary. "Everyone all right in here?" the sheriff demanded. Mel nodded. "We are now." Wilson surveyed the destruction, then looked at Chuck with narrowed eyes. "I'm told one man took on the entire Devil's Hand gang. That true?" Chuck shrugged modestly. "They weren't very organized." The sheriff's weathered face cracked into a reluctant smile. "Guess not." He studied Chuck more carefully, recognition dawning. "Say, aren't you just passing through?" Chuck interrupted gently. "Stopped for dinner." Wilson looked like he wanted to pursue the question, but instead he jerked his head toward the door. "We've got the gang outside. Going to need statements from all of you." "Of course," Mel agreed. "Whatever you need." As the sheriff turned to leave, he paused and looked back at Chuck. "1 man against 8, he said, shaking his head. "That's quite a story." Chuck met his gaze steadily. "Sometimes 1 is all it takes." The sheriff nodded slowly, understanding more than had been said. Then he pushed through the door, leaving them alone again in the battered diner. Danny picked up his broom, then set it aside, and approached Chuck hesitantly. "I just wanted to say thank you for stepping in, for not letting them." He swallowed hard. "Well, you know." Chuck placed a hand briefly on the young man's shoulder. "You held your ground," he said. "That takes courage." Danny flushed with pride at the simple words, standing a little straighter. Outside, engines started as patrol cars began to leave, presumably taking the bikers into custody. The crisis had passed, leaving in its wake a strange, almost peaceful quiet. Mel looked around at his damaged diner, then at Chuck, who had resumed cleaning without fanfare or complaint. "Can I get you anything?" he offered. On the house, of course. Least I can do. Chuck considered this for a moment, then nodded. Coffee would be nice. And maybe another slice of toast. Mel chuckled, the sound warming the battered space. Coming right up. As Mel moved behind the counter and Danny resumed sweeping, Chuck righted one last chair and sat down at the table he had occupied hours earlier. When the night was young and the diner peaceful. Outside, the neon sign flickered against the darkness. Inside, 3 men worked in companionable silence to restore order from chaos. Sometimes, Chuck reflected as he watched them, that was all anyone could do. One step at a time, one choice at a time. Creating islands of light in the surrounding darkness. Sheriff Wilson sat across from Chuck in a booth that had survived the night's chaos relatively intact. Between them lay a coffee-ringed statement form, filled out in Chuck's neat, economical handwriting. The sheriff studied it with pursed lips, then looked up at Chuck with undisguised curiosity. "So, you're really not going to admit who you are?" he asked, keeping his voice low enough that the deputies taking statements from Mel and Danny couldn't overhear. Chuck met his gaze evenly. "Does it matter?" Wilson considered this, then shook his head reluctantly. "Guess not. Statement's what counts." He tapped the paper with one blunt finger. "And this checks out with what the others said." He glanced around at the devastation of the diner. "More or less. More or less." Chuck agreed with the faintest hint of a smile. The sheriff leaned back, studying Chuck with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent decades reading people. "You know, the Devil's Hand Gang has been terrorizing this stretch of highway for months. Businesses, travelers, didn't matter, they took what they wanted and left fear in their wake." He shook his head. "Been trying to build a case against them, but witnesses have a way of forgetting what they saw when Ripper's boys come knocking later." "That's so," Chuck said. It wasn't a question. Wilson nodded. "But tonight? 8 of them caught red-handed, with multiple witnesses, property damage, assault charges, brandishing a firearm." He whistled softly. "That's going to stick. That's going to put them away for a good long while." Chuck sipped his coffee, neither confirming nor denying the implications of the sheriff's words. Wilson gathered up the statement and tucked it into a folder. "Well, whatever your reasons for being here tonight, I'd say the county owes you a debt of gratitude." He extended his hand across the table. "Thank you." Chuck shook it briefly, then returned to his coffee. As the sheriff rose to leave, Chuck spoke. "They had a choice," he said quietly. "They made the wrong one." Wilson paused, looking down at him thoughtfully. "Most do," he agreed. "That's job security in my line of work." He touched the brim of his hat in a small salute. "You take care now." The deputies finished with Mel and Danny, gathering their equipment and evidence bags. As they filed out, the bell above the door jingled one final time, and then the 3 men were alone in the battered diner. Dawn was still hours away, but the night seemed to have aged a decade since Chuck had first sat down for his late dinner. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsher now against the darkness outside. The jukebox had been silenced during the fight, leaving only the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional drip from a leaking pipe that had been damaged in the commotion. Mel surveyed his domain with a weary but determined eye. "Going to take some work to get this place back in shape," he said, more to himself than to the others. Danny had changed into a spare shirt Mel kept in the back, though he still looked bedraggled, his hair stiff with dried water and his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Nevertheless, he moved with purpose as he gathered broken dishes into a garbage bag. "I'll help you rebuild, Mr. Harrison," he said. "We can fix it up better than before." Mel's weathered face softened as he looked at the young man. "I know you will, son." He glanced at Chuck, who had resumed his quiet work of setting the diner to rights. "Though I reckon we've had enough excitement for one night. Why don't you head on home, get some rest?" Danny hesitated, looking around at the work still to be done. "You sure?" I don't mind staying. Go on, Mel insisted gently. Your mama will be wondering where you are. We'll tackle this fresh tomorrow. After a moment's more hesitation, Danny nodded. He set down the garbage bag and retrieved his backpack from behind the counter. As he shrugged it on, he paused beside Chuck. Thank you, he said simply. For everything. Chuck looked up from the table he was wiping down. You're going to make a fine engineer someday, he said quietly. Danny blinked in surprise, then smiled the first genuine smile since the bikers had entered the diner hours earlier. Yes, sir. I plan to. With a final nod to Mel, Danny pushed through the door and out into the night. Through the window, they watched him mount an old bicycle and pedal away, his silhouette soon swallowed by darkness. Mel moved behind the counter and began wiping it down with slow, circular motions. He's a good kid, he said. Works hard. Smarter than anyone in his family ever was, that's for sure. He glanced up at Chuck. Thanks for stepping in. For him. For all of us. Chuck nodded once, acknowledging the thanks without dwelling on it. He continued his methodical cleaning, moving through the diner with the same economy of motion he had displayed during the fight. Nothing wasted, nothing showy, just what needed to be done. They worked in companionable silence for a while, bringing order back to chaos, one small task at a time. Eventually, Mel paused, leaning on the counter with both hands. You know, he said, I've been running this place for 30 years. Seen all kinds come through those doors. Good folks, bad folks, those just passing through. He looked up at Chuck. But I've never seen anyone like you. Chuck continued arranging chairs around a table he had righted. Just a man having dinner, he said mildly. Mel snorted. Right. Just a man who took on 8 armed bikers without breaking a sweat. He shook his head. I'm not asking for your life story. Just saying. It's not every day you see someone stand up like that. Especially for strangers. Chuck straightened, considering his words carefully. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to do what's right, he said finally. Not because it's easy. Not because they'll win. But because it's right. Mel studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Wish there were more like you out there. There are, Chuck assured him. More than you might think. The conversation lapsed back into silence as they continued their work. Outside, the night sky had begun to soften, the pitch black giving way to the deep blue that precedes dawn. Inside, the diner was gradually transforming, still wounded, but no longer chaotic. Tables stood upright, chairs in their places. The larger debris had been cleared away, leaving only the finer cleaning to be done. Chuck paused by the window, looking out at the empty highway. His reflection stared back at him, steady eyes in a face that had seen much but revealed little. Behind him, Mel cleared his throat. So? What now? For you, I mean. Chuck turned. Finish my coffee, he said with the faintest hint of a smile. Then back on the road. Just like that? Mel asked, surprised. After everything that happened? Chuck nodded. Just like that. Mel hesitated, then asked the question that had been on his mind all night. Why? Why did you step in? You could have walked away when they first came in. Could have minded your own business. Chuck was quiet for a long moment, his gaze turning inward, as if consulting some private wisdom. When he spoke, his voice was soft but clear. There's a story, he began, about a man walking along a beach after a storm. Thousands of starfish had washed ashore, stranded by the tide. He noticed another man picking them up one by one and throwing them back into the ocean. He paused, looking out at the lightening sky. The first man said, "Why bother? There are thousands. You can't possibly make a difference." The second man bent down, picked up another starfish, and tossed it into the waves. Made a difference to that one, he said. Chuck turned back to Mel. Sometimes, that's all we can do. Make a difference where we are, when we can, with what we have. Mel absorbed this, nodding slowly. I suppose that's true. It's enough, Chuck said simply. They finished their work in silence, each lost in his own thoughts. By the time they were done, the sky outside had lightened to the pale gray of early morning. Birdsong drifted in through a cracked window. Nature's reminder that life continues regardless of human drama. Mel brewed a fresh pot of coffee and poured 2 cups. He handed one to Chuck, who accepted it with a nod of thanks. They sat at the counter side by side, sipping quietly, 2 men who had weathered a storm together. Will they be back? Mel asked finally. The bikers, or others like them? Chuck considered the question. The ones from tonight? No. They've learned their lesson. He took another sip of coffee. As for others, there's always someone who mistakes cruelty for strength. Always someone who thinks intimidation equals respect. Not very comforting, Mel observed dryly. No, Chuck agreed. But there's always someone willing to stand against them too. Remember that part. Mel smiled faintly. I will. They finished their coffee as the first true light of dawn crept across the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. The neon sign outside flickered off automatically, programmed to shut down at sunrise's own small piece of normality reasserting itself. Chuck stood, placing his empty cup on the counter. I should be going. Mel rose too, extending his hand. Safe travels. And thank you. Again. Chuck shook his hand firmly. Take care of Danny, he said. That boy's going places. Count on it, Mel assured him. Chuck turned toward the door, then paused. From his pocket, he withdrew a folded bill and placed it on the counter. For the meal, he explained. Mel stared at it in disbelief. After everything you did, you're still paying for dinner? Chuck's expression remained serious, but his eyes carried a hint of warmth. Best toast I've had in a long time. With that, he pushed through the door and out into the dawning day. Mel followed him to the threshold, watching as Chuck walked to a modest pickup truck parked at the far end of the lot. He climbed in without looking back, started the engine, and pulled onto the highway, heading east into the rising sun. Mel stood in the doorway long after the truck had disappeared from view. Something had changed during the night, not just in his diner, but in himself. A reminder, perhaps, of what courage looked like when it walked quietly through the world, asking nothing in return. With a small smile, he turned back to his battered but unbowed establishment. There was work to be done, a diner to rebuild, a new day to welcome. And in a world where men like Chuck Norris still roamed the highways, stopping for quiet meals in out-of-the-way places, there was hope. Sometimes, that was enough. 2 weeks later, Mel's roadside diner gleamed under the afternoon sun. The freshly painted sign cast no shadows yet, but soon the neon tubes would hum to life, beckoning travelers with promises of hot coffee and homemade pie. Inside, red vinyl booths lined the wall beneath windows that no longer rattled in their frames. The counter solid oak now instead of laminate gleamed under new pendant lights. Danny moved between tables with newfound confidence. The events of that night had changed him in subtle ways. He still carried the same textbooks in his backpack, but something in his bearing spoke of lessons learned beyond engineering manuals. The bell above the door jingled as Sheriff Wilson stepped in, removing his hat as he surveyed the renovated space. Place looks good, Mel, he said, settling onto a stool. Real good. Mel poured him coffee without asking. Insurance came through, and we had help. He nodded toward Danny. Boy's got a knack for design. Heard he's got a scholarship offer from state. Engineering program. Full ride, Mel confirmed, pride evident in his voice. Starts next fall. The sheriff nodded. That's why I stopped by. Got news I thought you'd want to hear." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Ripper and his boys, they're all going away for a while. Between 3 and 5 years." Mel let out a long breath. "That is good news. Gets better. Part of the deal is they forfeit their colors. Devil's Hand is officially disbanded." As if summoned, Danny approached with the coffee pot. "Refill, Sheriff?" Wilson held out his cup. "Thanks, son. Here, congratulations are in order." Danny flushed with pleasure. "Yes, sir. Still can't quite believe it." "Believe it?" Wilson said firmly. "You earned it." Danny's smile faltered slightly. "About that night. That man who helped us. Mr. Smith?" Wilson supplied, using the name Chuck had given. "Right. It was him, wasn't it? Chuck Norris." The sheriff took another sip of coffee. "Funny thing about legends. Sometimes they're just stories we tell ourselves. Other times," he trailed off, "other times they walk right through our door when we need them most." Danny nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about it a lot. Not just what he did, but how he did it. He wasn't angry. Wasn't showing off. Wasn't even afraid. He just knew what needed to be done and did it." "That's a rare quality," Wilson said. As dusk approached, Mel stepped outside to turn on the neon sign. It flickered to life, casting a warm blue glow across the parking lot, a beacon for travelers, a promise of respite. Inside, Danny gathered his books. "Think I can leave early, Mr. Harrison? Big test tomorrow." Mel waved him off. "Go on." Danny hesitated. "I think I understand now what he meant. About choices. About doing what's right because it's right, not because it's easy." He shouldered his backpack. "I want to be that kind of engineer. The kind that builds things that last, that matter. The kind that makes the right choices, even when they're hard." "I think you're well on your way," Mel said quietly. As full darkness settled, the diner glowed like an island of light amid the vast Texas night. The bell above the door jingled softly. Mel looked up, the greeting dying on his lips as he recognized the silhouette. Chuck Norris stood in the doorway, as unassuming as before. "Evening," he said simply. "Evening yourself. Coffee?" Chuck nodded, taking a seat at the counter. His eyes moved around the renovated diner with quiet approval. "Place looks good," he observed, as Mel set a steaming cup before him. "Didn't expect to see you again," Mel admitted. "Was passing through. Thought I'd stop for dinner." "Menu's the same," Mel told him. "Except for one addition." He tapped a laminated card describing the Peacekeeper Special. The corner of Chuck's mouth twitched. "I'll have that then." As Mel prepared the meal, he asked, "What brings you back this way?" "Checking on something I started." "The boy's doing well. Got a full scholarship." Chuck nodded, satisfaction in his eyes. "Good. And you?" Chuck asked. "How are you doing?" The question surprised Mel. He considered it seriously. "Better," he said finally. "Different. That night, it showed me something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" "That one person can make a difference. One choice. One moment. One stand." Chuck inclined his head slightly. "Sometimes we all need reminding." As Chuck finished his meal, he reached for his wallet. Mel shook his head firmly. "Not a chance. Your money's no good here." Chuck considered this, then nodded in acceptance. "Thank you." "No," Mel replied quietly. "Thank you." As Chuck rose to leave, Mel spoke again. "Can I ask you something? Why did you really come back?" Chuck was silent for a moment, his eyes moving around the diner, taking in the rebuilt counter, the fresh paint, the people enjoying their meals. "To see," he said finally. "See what?" "If it took the lesson." Mel gestured around the renewed diner. "What do you think?" A rare, genuine smile crossed Chuck's face. "I think it did," He extended his hand. Mel shook it firmly. No more words necessary between them. Chuck turned and walked to the door. The bell jingled softly overhead. Safe travels, Mel called after him. Chuck paused in the doorway. You too, he said simply, and then he was gone. Mel watched through the window as Chuck's truck pulled away, merging into the stream of traffic that flowed endlessly east and west, carrying countless stories, countless possibilities. Outside, the neon sign cast its blue glow across the parking lot. A beacon in the Texas night. Inside, life continued changed, improved, more mindful of its fragility and its strength. And somewhere on the highway, a solitary truck headed into the darkness, carrying a quiet man to his next destination, his next meal, his next choice. Some would call him a legend, others, a hero. But in truth, he was simply a man who understood the most fundamental lesson of all. That true power comes not from noise or numbers, but from the quiet dignity of doing what's right, when it matters most. One person, one moment, one stand. Sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.